to work with you, work with you all, and and the good work that you all have already been doing here with the People's Coalition. So.
All right, can you all see my screen? Are you all able to see that? Perfect. All right, I'll go on mute and hand it over to our president, Yvette Carnell.
Thanks, Emion. American Descendants of Slavery Foundation, we were built off of, and we consider ourselves a continuation of MLK's work. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, every man must ultimately confront the question, who am I? And seek to answer it honestly. The American Negro is neither totally African nor totally Western. Who are we? We are the descendants of slaves. I, for one, am not ashamed of this past. Our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America, and the Negro must face the fact that America is now his home, a home that he helped to build through blood, sweat, and tears. This right here is just, we've had 2 conferences. These are just images, pictures from our last conferences. We have people, although we're headquartered in Georgia, we have people, activists around the country. So these are some of the, this is our most recent conferences, some pictures from that. We have been, in terms of our advocacy, we have been in the news 2019, 2020, 2021, and one of our core, the foundational principles is that we are self-interested, meaning that we have to advocate for Black America, specifically in terms of how we do our politics. And this was us in the New York Times. This was us in Politico. Part of how we have this mainstreaming of the reparations conversation is that we tutored Marianne Williamson to bring that to the debate stage. And this was an article, a write-up about us in Politico. We were also in Vox explaining what American Descendants of Slavery is. It's not about slavery, it's about the institution of slavery and what it wrought in our lives. And we explained that, and the importance of specificity to Vox. This was also in run up to the 2020 election. We were also in Forbes. It's just a list of like the news articles trying to understand us and how we explained ourselves to them. Reparations Now, why white people must join the fight. This is probably the most recent interview that I did with NPR. Racial justice advocates call for slavery descendants, for descendants of slavery to be included in the 2030 census. So what we have done at the OMB is call for disaggregation in the same way that other groups get to disaggregate and claim nationality. We have said, listen, we have a specific sort of oppression that is built in and out of slavery and 400 years of oppression, and that should be counted in the census. So our most recent advocacy has been at the OMB, and we're asking for a disaggregation. We're still included in Blackness, but you need to count this specific group. And this interview was in December of 2022. And when we talk about reparations and the reparations movement, the reason that you see when you look at that chart, that specific uptick in 2019, that is the height of our advocacy. We made a case through wealth data about the urgency of reparations. It caught fire, and some of you probably have seen it in the news and a lot of these different articles. We didn't get to all the articles or the most recent articles, but this is a graph that just shows how we impacted the momentum in terms of the reparations conversation. This is a timeline, and this is why when we say we are American descendants of slavery, part of that is that timeline of being this group that has been subjugated throughout this timeline from 1619 to 2023. And so because of that specific history, we ask for a specific designation and we ask for a specific redress. So that's important. On January 16, 1865, General Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15, which confiscated land as Union property and redistributed the roughly 400,000 acres of land to newly freed Black families in the 40-acre segments. March 13, 1865, President Lincoln established the Freedmen's Bureau. It was authorized to give legal title for 40-acre plots of land to freedmen and Southern Unionists. Fall of 1865, after Lincoln's assassination, U.S. President Andrew Johnson overturned Sherman's directive and returned most of the land to the planters who had originally owned it. So we have a situation where we never got the 40 acres and a mule, and the land went back to the Confederates. And our reparations advocacy is built to give us not only that 40 acres, but what was lost during those years of accrued disadvantage as well. If you're made into a racialized bottom caste, there's a cost, there's a debt that is owed, and the center of our advocacy is getting that debt paid. Slavery, a continuation. One of the things that we talk about is that slavery was not a long time ago. And so you look at Black people were enslaved in the US as recently as 1963. You look at this quote, I met about 20 people, all who worked on the Waterford plantation in St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, Harold told Vice. They told me they had worked the fields for most of their lives. One way or another, they had become indebted to the plantation's owner and were not allowed to leave the property. Now, you got to look at the date on this. So when people tell you that this cost was a long time ago and we've been made truly American, we know that that's just not true. Right here is just some data, because one of the things that we have used to kind of make the case for reparations is what the data looks like in terms of the wealth gap. And we call it a lineage wealth gap. Here is described as a racial wealth gap. But when you look at white versus Black, median household wealth, 25 to 40 years old, what we understand is that this is not made up with income, it's only made up with wealth. And that wealth that was plundered has to be repaid. So we just have some data specificity when it comes to that. Some additional data, the racial wealth gap, full-time. So what we're looking at here, median household net worth by race and employment status. Full-time white are worth 144,000, Black 11,000, out of labor 75,000 for white, 1,700 for Black, unemployed 55,000, unemployed for white, 1,300 for Black. This is a legacy of discrimination. This does not come out of income. It does not come out of individual effort. The racial wealth gap, median household net worth by race and education. So even post-college, you look at white, you look at the white side, the white line is 455,000. You look at Black, it's 141,000. You look at college educated, not post-college, just college, you see 268,000 versus 70,000 for Black. Some college, 135,000 versus 18,000 for Black. And this is the category. These last two really kind of stick out for me. High school, 118,580 for white and 6,660. So you can graduate. This is an outcome for a high school graduate. You almost have that for less than high school at 82,968 versus 2,775 for Black. These are not outcomes, again, that reflect any kind of individual effort. These are outcomes that reflect a society that has decided to fasten us to the bottom. That bottom line at the bottom, I call it the flat line. That is the racial wealth gap. That's us right there. That little line is not moving. Like that's us, and we're in the wealthiest country in the world where you need wealth to actually survive and thrive, and that is our line. Racial wealth inequality is rampant in the U.S. You see the same thing here. We don't have real estate, we don't have consumable goods, and the most of what we have is pensions, is in pensions, and that is in our elderly, and that wealth leaves when they leave. When they pass on, that pension wealth is gone. We have hardly any of the wealth, the other wealth. Look at real estate. Look at 25, that's in trillions, 25.93 versus 1.87. We don't have wealth. and we're going to zero wealth in the richest country in the world, and reparations is the only way to make up for it. One of the things that we talk about is that there's a legacy that we spend a lot of time talking about wealth, as well we should. It's the most important thing in America in terms of your future. But even when you look at arrests, like marijuana arrests, right? You see that this over policing and getting our people in prisons and being part of the mass incarceration plague is also a part of that. These are just some numbers, sentenced prisoners by race. These are just some numbers to kind of hold that demonstrate. When you see this kind of disparity, what it demonstrates is that this is an intentional plan for us to be warehoused in prisons, Black people, and especially Black men. And when I talk about, we have a lot of people, different groups that are caught up in this web, and this just demonstrates that. Even suicide rates, when you don't see a future, when we talk about depression, when we talk about outcomes, that has a psychological effect. And we see that in suicide attempts for Black teenagers and versus white teenagers from 1991 to 2017. So this lack of wealth, this lack of opportunity, this lack of access to an American life, it's not just law enforcement, it's not just reparations, it's not just psychological. This impacts every aspect of our life. And that's why when we talk about reparations, we talk about it as a necessity. There's an urgent need for it. Reparations is the repayment for slavery and multi-generational plunder. We support a federal reparations that at minimum, a federal reparations package should prioritize cash payments for lost wages beginning at $20 trillion to American descendants of slavery, ADOS. Together with targeted policies and protections, the redistributive measures will be ongoing and must remain in effect. At the very least, the wealth gap between white Americans and ADOS is closed. Local reparations should support federal reparations by researching local harms against ADOS and apply political pressure for the federal government to support a comprehensive reparations package. We use the work of Thomas Kramer as well, who says, my personal preference would be that there be a substantial cash payment. It would have to be paid back sooner rather than later because the wealth that was created is earning interest in more and more diffuse hands. It's earning compound interest, which grows exponentially. So the debt grows exponentially. Every year we wait, it'll be more. And this is just how he reaches that number of that 20 trillion enslaved population, hours worked, wage, interest, etc. Outstanding debt owed 20.3 trillion. Now, how can we help? Like, what can we do as a foundation? We want to kind of explain that. We, in terms of reparations, we understand that the poverty and the wealth are still in the system, but we have other aspects of our foundation that we can help because we believe in a transformative Black agenda as well. We are able to help with local proposals and resolutions, policy consulting, reparations, education sessions, activist organizer training, phone banking, canvassing. And that is our presentation for today. So we look forward to working with the Georgia Coalition for the Peoples, and we look forward to being here. I am a fan, and I respect the work that has already been done here, and I appreciate you all having me and allowing me to present here today. Thank you so much.
Lyndon, I see we have some hands raised as well. Is there any time for questions? I do see a few hands raised.
Yep, we do. Faye and then Broderick.
Well, my question about reparations is always because of what is going on with the French and the British on the African continent. Are we planning on looking at this, number one, as a thing for the destruction of the African continent? And number two, and most importantly to me, will we get this money individually? Because there are some of us, if given the opportunity with reparations, we would be leaving. And I would be one of those ones that would be taking my money and just leaving the country, because I can't see a change. If we remain here, we're still going to be surrounded, and we're still going to have that clotting that we keep seeing. And I think Nashville was just an indication of how far people will go and how blatant it will be. So I want to know, are you planning to give these reparation funds to individuals so that those of us that want to leave can leave?
I think any kind of reparations plans has to include cash payments, which means there would be a payment to you individually, and you will be able to use that money however you see fit. Whether if you want to leave, you could use it to leave. If you wanted to invest it, if whatever you want to do with it, that is absolutely up to you. In terms of Africa, I think there are organizations on the continent of Africa, just like there are organizations like CARICOM in the Caribbean that are fighting for reparations. And I think we can collaborate with them and try to figure out strategies and do everything we need to do to fight for reparations here in America. So I respect, and I think we should all collaborate with one another, but different organizations are doing that work in different countries that are fighting the West and fighting whatever Western country oppressed them, right? So I think we have a collaborative position with those organizations in African countries and Caribbean countries that are doing that work.
All right, Broderick.
Hey, what's up, Yvette? This is Broderick Flanagan out of Athens, Georgia. Not sure if you remember me or not.
Hey.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I was around when you and Irene were doing the show in my studio spot.
I know, like 2000. Yeah, it's been a minute. How you been?
I've been great. I've been watching from afar. Love how the work is progressing. I just wanted to come and give you a shout out and offer any support that I can from afar. Also, I had a quick question though about like one thing that we ran up against here in Athens when we were talking about reparations and what I've seen in other states as well is at the state level they bring up the gratuities clause and as an excuse to not make direct payments for redress or restitution to our people. And so, do y'all have a plan to address that, or how are y'all planning to like circumvent that, or is that a part of y'all's strategy?
Well, I think one, in terms of local reparations, we do believe it's going to be extremely difficult for local and municipalities to pay out what's owed, right? When we talk about who has the bounty of money, who has the bounty of cash, you can go look at this defense budget and see who has all the money, and it's the federal government. What we would like to see states do more than that is to study how they impacted and oppressed ADOS, whether it be slaves or the American descendants of slavery, their role, so that we can use that to leverage against the federal government and pass resolutions with that information, so that when it's time to go at the federal government, which is now, we would love to see that be what they do, right? As opposed to saying we're going to pay out, because we all see what happened in different states. We see what happened in Evanston, where there's only been like 2 payouts, and then it ended up being sort of a home revitalization program, as opposed to what Faye kind of signaled in terms of, I want to have enough money to leave. That kind of money comes from the federal government. So there's a limitation that they're running into in terms of local governments and municipalities that honestly should have been expected. And so we're looking to local governments and municipalities to help us leverage the fight against the federal government, as opposed to give us the true payout for reparations.
All right, John Jones, followed by Ms. Damaris and then Adriana. John, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. My question deals with, I think, what she just covered. If the federal government would fund it, the states, but not local government, I think should be responsible for what they allowed. Local could be involved somehow. I live in Gwinnett County. There's a church in Lawrenceville, I believe it's Lawrenceville, that is offering scholarships, but they make the statement that it's not reparations. They're offering scholarships to descendants of the Black people whose land was taken in order to build Lake Lanier. I met a gentleman who invited me to attend the church and said there are some descendants of those people who attend the church. I met him at the reenactment of the Moores Ford Bridge lynchings last month. At the first, oh no, it was on the 1st of this month. And so there are some individual people, individual actions that we need to be aware of that are working toward the same thing. Of course, this man happened to be a white man. I'm not sure if there's anything that advanced other than this lady here in her organization that is on the road toward reparations. Most of what I've heard in my lifetime has been just talk about there should be. But as far as specific steps being taken, specific plans, I'm not aware of anything other than that scholarship I just mentioned, or those scholarships, because it's several scholarships.
Thank you, John. And it's interesting that you mentioned Moores Ford, because my mother lived right near that bridge, and she remembered the night they came out with the cars and that atrocity, and her mother ran her back in the house. So it's very interesting that you bring that up. And I think there's a role, like there are all kinds of people right now who are voluntarily doing things. You see even different churches, right, and denominations are saying we want to do a scholarship, or you see what's happening, some of what's happening at different institutions and colleges. So we're not saying that people can't do what they do, but in terms of, and that shouldn't happen, that should happen, especially for people who have any kind of moral core or center. But in terms of who should lead this fight and who should pay the bulk of this money, it should come from the federal government. We're talking trillions of dollars.
Mr. Waller, if I might add one, it's not a follow-up. When we talk about the census, and I worked during the census of 2010, I'm asking, I'm sorry, ma'am, I joined late, I didn't get your name. Are we saying a question on the census about whether or not we who are currently living are descended from slaves, or what type of census data would you be gathering?
Well, it's not necessarily gathering. What we're asking people to do is add a new category underneath Black. So we're Black, but we are categorized as American descendants of slavery, because one of the things they always ask is, well, who does it go to? Who does it go to? Who gets the money? And so we have to disaggregate in order to get to that position of, okay, this specific group is represented. So we're just advocating for a specific category underneath Blackness.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Damaris. Ms. Damaris, you're still on mute.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I was happy to hear that you'll be working with other groups, because I didn't understand the separation before. And when I say other groups, I mean internationally, right? What I was doing on my phone was doing a little research to remind myself of some of the information. And slaves arrived in Central and the Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, Jamaica, as early as 1513 from the Liberian Peninsula, right? So to separate the groups, especially those that are here, that are US citizens, is almost to penalize them for being dropped off somewhere else. The slave trade made just as much money, if not more, on tobacco and the sugar that they use for alcohol. Dr. Lewis Gates covered a presentation on that really, really well. So, you know, it's almost like we buy into that narrative where they say stuff about people born in foreign countries and African Americans don't like Blacks from those countries, and vice versa. And I say that firsthand from my personal experience as a Panamanian. And when I lived in Panama, we had one English channel because we had all the military bases there. And when we watched the news, they would say negative things about African Americans. So when we landed here, we didn't like African Americans, just based on what we heard on the news. So glad to hear that you're working with other groups internationally, and I hope we figure it out. And
thank you so much for that. And let me just say something. CARICOM does represent that group. When you talk about Jamaicans, they represent them, and they don't represent us, right? And nobody considers that divisive. When you say CARICOM only represents Caribbean countries and their claim for reparations. Nobody says, why don't you also consider American descendants of chattel slavery? Nobody says that's divisive. It's understood that we're all doing the best we can where we are, and we will collaborate where necessary. So it's not a penalty to them. They're doing their work with their organization, and I respect it. And we're doing our work with our organizations, and I hope they respect the work that we're doing here in America. And where there is opportunity to collaborate, we absolutely will do that. But it doesn't have anything to do with ill will. That both of us are exclusively fighting for two different groups. They're fighting, and their claim doesn't include us as well. So, and I don't feel any kind of animosity about them specifically fighting for the Caribbean. I don't have any animosity about that, and I hope they don't have any animosity about what I'm doing here.
How do you spell CARICOM? I wasn't aware of that. Thank you. How do you spelling that?
I think it's CRAICOM. Go ahead, Sammy.
CARICOM.
CACOM?
CARICOM.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Carnell Belton. I'm sorry, my phone cut out, and I was just letting you know I was here in attendance.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, Adriana.
Yes, I'm with the Stewart Foundation. I'm sorry.
My first question, can you hear me?
Yes, we gave you.
My first question for Ms. Carnell is, I heard you mention the OMB. What is that? And can you tell us a little bit more about your campaign?
The Office of Management and Budget, they determine like how groups, how when we talk about racial and ethnic groups, they determine what those groupings look like, right? How they're defined. So you all might have heard that MENA, Middle Eastern North African, they have their own push right now as well, right? To define themselves and define how they are, for lack of a better word, defined. And so we're pushing that as well. We're saying that, listen, there isn't, every group has a specific history. Every group has a specific lineage. And in the same way, American descendants of slavery, we have a specific lineage in this country, which includes slavery and 400 years of accrued disadvantage and intentional oppression. And that has to be counted. So at the OMB, we're saying we're advocating that people send in letters. Not send in actual letters. There's a website where you go and you say, listen, we are a specific group. In the same way, a lot of Jamaican Americans will define themselves. I'm Jamaican American, Haitian American, Ghanaian American, Nigerian American. They'll define themselves by nationality. We define, and Jamaica actually pushed for this some years ago as well to have this aggregation. We want to define ourselves as ADOS, and you have to go through the OMB to do that. So that's what we're working on now. And part of the reason we have an issue with how race is defined in terms of, the merits. And the last question too is because the Supreme Court has basically said you can't do anything just based on race, but there is a specific window open that you can use for lineage and redress. So if something specifically happened to you and your people, we can use laws to redress that, but you can't do it just based on being Black or brown. It has to be on something specific that happened to a group of people. And so that's part of the reason that we're pushing OMB to disaggregate us as a specific group, so we can highlight the cost of coming from the institution of slavery in this country and what that's done to us.
Yvette, if I may also add, one of our most recent pushes, we have trained over 1,600 people to engage with the Office of Management and Budget, activists on the ground around the country who believe these issues are important. They are actively writing letters and filling out comments to the Office of Management and Budget in support of that. So at the heart of one of the things we've been doing is the civic education and the training of advocates who want to get involved.
Thank you, Sabina.
Well, you sent me to get into good trouble because I don't see Panama amongst the 15 countries that are in CARICOM. So I'll research it and pass the information on. Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem.
All right, Adriana, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I heard the other fellow mention advocacy. So what does advocacy around reparations look like?
Who did you hear say that? I'm sorry, was the question for me?
You are the guy that had the ADOS in the back.
Oh, Simeon. I'll let Simeon have it.
Well, I think one, advocacy looks at defining our goal. And, you know, like in this moment, our goal is around our ethnic identifier designation on the census and all federal forms, really defining the who. And I think that advocacy is around bringing everyone together on that. I think that every group should support us wanting to be recognized for the specific contributions we've made in this country, as well as the specific harm that has happened to us in this country. And I think that that's something that we can all get around, whether you're from Panama, whether you're from South Africa, whether you're from Ghana, whether you're from America, whether you're Irish, we should all get around that concept of justice. And I believe it's also kind of what leads everyone in this room too. When I think of the people's agenda and I think about what we need to do to bring the entire people along, what we found is over time, our group always gets left behind. And so advocacy in this moment is around our particular group and what's needed to repair the group that has the longest grievance in this country. And we know that by fixing our group, we've fixed so much of America. And so our advocacy is around that specificity. I hope that answers your question.
And that's our reparations advocacy. We do have a Black agenda that includes everyone, right? The reparations advocacy is specific, but we do have a Black agenda. If you go to adosfoundation.org, we have a Black agenda that is a Black agenda, a transformative Black agenda that's all inclusive.
All right, Sherry.
Hi, I just want to thank you guys for bringing this important topic about, and I also want to thank Larry and Ray, who have brought us information over time about reparations. And you did not mention it on this call, but I did have to leave the room for a moment. But one of the things that really hit a nerve with me, that in a positive manner, was the way they explained when people say, well, who is the money going to? Who is the money going to? And they used the example of Barack Obama and Michelle. And I think a lot of people, because they are not educated and they don't understand this economic piece here, and it is critical that everybody understand, even if everyone chooses not to agree. But can someone on this call who can probably do it better than I can, explain that scenario on how you guys have gone back and decided how some Black people would be eligible for the money and others would not? Unless I missed it in this presentation.
Well, basically, I'll just give you the short of it. We're talking about having an ancestor that ties you to slavery in this country, right?
Yes, and my thing is that the simplistic nature of how they used Barack Obama and Michelle Obama as an example of how it would work, I think people would really understand that. And I think both of them are on the call.
I'm not sure how they use Barack. You know,
I think the overall reference, and Larry and Ray, please feel free to speak up. But I think the overall reference is you have Michelle Obama, who descended from slavery here, and Michelle is Black. We know Michelle is Black. No one would have any question about that. And you have Barack Obama, who had a white mother and a Kenyan father. And in society, Barack Obama is considered Black, but that's a totally different lived experience than, you know, someone whose parents or grandparents were sharecroppers, whose parents saw slavery, our great-grandparents who saw slavery, and who went through Jim Crow. That's a totally different experience, and in all reality, a different ethnicity of person. Just like we would know that a Trinidadian is different than a Panamanian. Even if they looked alike, there are different customs, there's different culture, there are different experiences. with government, different experiences in terms of how they manage familial ties. There are different experiences there. And you can see that in Barack and in President Obama and our former First Lady, Michelle Obama.
And I think one of the things that we have to define is that there's lived experience and there's inherited experience, and they're not the same thing. You have, and we have as ADOS, an inherited lack, an inherited oppression, right? That is an inherited wealthlessness that we can draw a line and trace all the way to slavery. We're a racialized bottom caste. Somebody who comes here may have a lived experience where they say, like Barack Obama said, I couldn't catch a cab. That's discrimination. We deal with discrimination through anti-discrimination law. So there should be anti-discrimination law to make sure that that person is treated equally in this country because they have a lived experience that includes discrimination. An inherited experience is something very different. It is an accrued disadvantage and oppression over generations. That's an inherited experience. So we're talking about inherited versus lived experience.
All right, Tamara.
Okay, you all kind of touched on it with Sherry's question, but when it comes down to the census and getting that marker on the census, who would the burden be on the individual to be able to say, my great-great-grandfather worked on this plantation in South Carolina, and be able to bring that up? Or are we just assuming, or would it just be assumed that because someone has 2 Black parents, that they would be classified as a DOS?
Well, I think I can answer, and you can add on something. I'm sorry, but I think pre-1965, the number of Black immigrants in this country was to the right of the decimal point. So if you can trace your line before that, we sort of know already who you are and what you come from, right? You come from sharecroppers, you come from slavery. But in terms of reparations itself, in terms of what we're building out, right? We want to build out the same thing when you talk about the Indian affairs. We would like to build out an Office of ADOS affairs, right? Who can actually help you do that with some level of specificity. But I didn't mean to cut you off, Samir.
Yes, and also with forms like the census and federal government forms, it's for you to self-identify. So you wouldn't need some type of documentation to check that box, just like you don't need to check it now for Black or African American, right? Mm-hmm. So you would still be able to check that box. But to Yvette's point, there are certain markers here. Again, like if your folks are here pre-1965, there's a 99% chance that you descend from slavery. You have a really more than 99%. You also have family with sharecropping, things of that nature. There are certain markers for our particular group that you see happen here in America. But again, for census and forms, those are all to self-identify.
All right, we had a question from Susan Ross in the chat. How are you all related to the reparations movement in California?
Well, the reparations movement in California actually initially started as an ADOS movement, and it moved on to become something else, a different group. So we don't have any kind of relationship to it now, because that happens in movements. People decide that they want to do what they want to do, go their own way. So we don't have any relationship we don't have any leadership in terms of what's happening in California. That's led by a different group now called with a different name. So that's not us.
All right. And John Jones had another question. Oh, you're on mute.
You muted there, Mr. Jones.
Sorry, I got you. Thank you. I was thanking Mr. Waller first for calling on me. We're really talking a heavy psychological issue that bred and still brings up deep psychological pain and hurt. There are those of us, and you see my picture, I hope, that can identify as African American and nobody will question it. I was raised by my maternal grandmother, even though my parents lived right next door in a house my grandmother owned. She was the descendant, the granddaughter of a half-white man who came to Texas from Louisiana after slavery. I have discussed this with a friend of mine who's now deceased, who is strongly into our African heritage, and he thought that that should be held as a penalty against me getting reparations, and we kind of joked about it. We really would discuss late into the night whether I should be proud, as my grandmother was, of her white ancestors and what they accomplished. And so the descendant of a plantation owner, I'm fifth generation descendant of a plantation owner. There are those that I've met that are even closer connected to slavery as owners, and then as well as closer as descendants of slaves whose parents, both sides, were slaves. I hope we don't get into that type of minutia,
No.
but there are some of us that need counseling, and so some money would be nice, very nice.
Well,
But some mental help would be too.
yeah,
I'm a retired teacher. Let me just say this, and I had
Uh-huh.
one psychology course. It was child psychology for the education degree. Living Life, University of Life. I have been through a school of mental health with personal experience myself. And the things that affect our minds, our emotions, from religion to, I won't even get on a tangent and go off on that, to, of course, slavery. It's very complicated. It's very complex. And so to talk money as reparations leaves out a whole lot of other stuff that this country needs to do. And I'm a churchman, to get right with God. I'm gonna put it that way. And I don't know if there are any preachers in the audience there that'll back me up, but to get right with God, you got to deal with the whole thing. And I'll leave it at that, more of a comment than a question.
Well, I still, I would actually want to speak to it. And I thank you for that, John, because I still want to speak to it, because we're in a moment that calls for a reckoning. That's just what it is. And I agree that a reckoning deals with all things. We have even talked about lineage therapy, and I'm sure you see my face. So you don't it's just like it's all African ancestors here. One of the things that I've always said is that, like, listen, as ADOS, we are the descendants of slaves and slave masters. Right. So there is no this sort of, who has the most melanin thing doesn't kind of play in here. We are an amalgamation of groups here. And during a time when female slaves didn't have rights to their own bodies, it should be no surprise, what we look like right now. Right. And so that, we are still one, and we view this too as a move in the direction of unity. We know we've gone through years of colorism because there's a proximity to whiteness for those of us who are lighter skinned, right? So this is a unifying moment where we all come together and say, hey, we are an amalgamation. Some of us are dark, some of us are lighter. We know why we look the way we look, but we're one, and we're all owed reparations, and that's kind of where we are. But I agree with you about we've talked about lineage therapy. We talk about the shame that comes with all of that. We've talked about how some people just escape through any number of fantastical kind of mental arrangements. So we've had those conversations. I agree with you that is absolutely necessary.
Thank you.
All right. Any further questions? Comments?
Is ADOS are y'all or Republican or Democrats?
we don't listen. Y'all Republicans are different. Like most Black people are Democrats, and so we want to hold the party accountable, but we don't adhere to saying that we ride with one party. We ride based on the agenda that we have up on our website, right? That is the agenda that benefits Black America in terms of our transformative Black agenda, and reparations benefits us, right? So we're not somebody who just decides that we're not going to go vote red, and we're certainly not just going to go vote blue no matter who. But to the extent that Democrats undergird everything, we typically vote for the Democratic Party. We typically send them to the White House. And what we have always said is, listen, you have to do something for us. We always show up and support you. Voting is an exchange. So what we have said to Democrats is that we always show up to vote you. We turn red states blue for Barack Obama. We sent Joe Biden to the White House. It's time for an exchange. It's time for us to have our needs met, our quality of life improved. And I spoke last night about how you know, we're the only group who, if we believe in something, there's a great study about this. If we believe in something, we're the only group where where because we believe in it, it doesn't happen or it goes back. Like if you want to pass something, you say black people don't like it, and it will take off and get running shoes on. And that goes to show that we don't have the leverage that we need as a political group, and we're not holding the party that we vote for accountable. So I would say we're not about just party politics. We're about accountability inside of party politics.
All right, I think Mr. Spooner has a question, then followed by Ms. B, and then a question from the chat.
I wasn't in the hearing at all, but what I'm trying to find out is in dealing with the reparations, say someone came from the West Indies and married a woman from the South, all right, would they be included in this exchange with this policy that's being developed? How would they relate to that?
I would say the man from the West Indies married well, because he married a woman who can access reparations, right? But he would not be covered by that. But he did a good job in terms of marrying a woman and marrying into reparations and marrying into that fight. Now, if they had a child, right? Let's say that those two people had a child. That child is entitled to the full bounty because they have one parent who they can tie all the way back to slavery. They have that mother. So that child would absolutely, through the mother, be able to access it. So that would be the answer to that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Ms. B.
I have more of a comment than a question. My comment is, we always talk about Democrats and Republicans. We have to remember what Dr. Laura has always said, that I don't have permanent friends nor permanent enemies. My thing is permanent issues. My issue is permanent, and slavery is permanent. The wealth gap is permanent. Now, whoever wants to help me heal this gap, then that's who I'm working with. And if I work with them and they don't do what I said, or they said they were going to do, then I'm going to hold them accountable. So that's why, that's what we have to stop this party line stuff so much. I love the Democrats. I have worked with them, but there are things they do that get on my darn nerve to the end. And I'm going to tell them that. And I'm going to tell them, if you keep this up, I'm going to vote against you, and I'm going to lead other people to vote against you. There's some black women down at the State House right now. I won't call their name on this call, but they are going to hear from me because they haven't done what we sent them down there to do. They're pushing Betty DeVos's agenda. And schools and all that stuff. So I got to let them know that I don't like it.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment if I might.
You certainly can, Reverend Milner. Good to see you on.
Thank you, Ms. B.
Thank you. It's good to be on.
Amen, Ms. B.
I wanted to say that I'm glad to hear this conversation, this exchange. I'm glad to hear an attempt to explain why Africans dropped off on the outer islands are not included in what's happening on the mainland here. I think conversation ought to be forthcoming on all sides so that it doesn't appear that we're so divided that the white folks just walk away with the bounty. While we arguing with who's a real descendant of slaves and who's not. Whether it's the Caribbean or on the mainland here in the United States, all of us are descendants. But if those who are trying to get money from the US government, trying to get reparations for those who are affected on the mainland, then they ought to be specific about it, so it doesn't appear that we're fighting each other over the crumbs that we may or may not get. Far and beyond reparations. In the pursuit of that, I do hope those of us that have tried to learn the economic system of this nation, be able to amass a little bit of wealth, will try to share with those who have none. I'm talking about sharing money and knowledge, how they can maybe get for themselves. So I want to commend this group. Thank you so much for being on. Thank all of you for sharing your feelings, your emotions, your passion. And John, thank you for bringing up the fact that you're a churchman and that people ought to seek first the Lord. But more than anything, I do hope there will be a cooperative spirit among those of you who are so passionate about this issue. I certainly am angry. And by the way, I want to commend the young lady for bringing up the fact that because one of my great-grandfathers was white, doesn't mean that somehow or another it ought to be a disparagement against me. It ought to be against him. Hell, he raped my great-grandmother. So I thank you for bringing out that issue.
Thank you, Reverend Milner.
Yeah,
Now you tell the truth now. You tell
Yeah.
the truth now.
Let's not get so caught up on that stuff, because people want us to fight with each other over, like I say, the crumbs that may be forthcoming, and be ain't nobody writing checks. They even took away the affirmative action for most of us. That was part of the reparations that they wanted to give us without calling it reparations. So they ain't writing checks. They gonna find a way to give you something other than them 40 acres and a mule. So I pray for your continued effort. If nothing else, you're bringing the awareness to the world of the atrocities that happened to people that had nothing to say about it. And when these white folk talking about, I didn't do it, it wasn't me, they're still responsible, because they are enjoying the wealth created by our labor that was never paid for. So again, I thank you. And Lyndon, I just want to say that because I'm not sure how long I'll be on, but I certainly appreciate this dialogue. That has been missing from this whole reparation thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend. And let me just say one thing. It's not a division, at least in my mind. I actually, amongst different groups that have descendants from Africa, I don't view it that way. I actually view it as somewhat strategic, right? Like, there is no global Black justice claim. There are only justice claims against specific countries. So I agree that the French owe reparations to the Haitians, right?
Amen.
I agree that Belgium owes reparations to the Congo, right? But they can only bring a justice claim against the specific country that harmed them, just like we can only bring our justice claim against America. So it has to be specific. We can all have affection for each other, we can all collaborate, but when you talk about who specifically harmed me, that's a specific justice claim. And so everybody has to go after whatever Western country or European country caused them harm or extracted wealth from them. That's just the way that that reparations are paid, whether it be in America or globally. That's the thinking behind it. So I want to just stress that it's not out of any kind of animus on I don't think anybody's part. And I would also say, even in terms of the Reverend brought up affirmative action, the main beneficiaries of affirmative action were white women. So it had kind of been bastardized anyway in terms of something that was intended for us that got away and was given to other people. And what some of the justices did say at the Supreme Court recently is say that, hey, we can use lineage. If we did something wrong to somebody, we can try to make it right. That's a way to do it. But we can't just say we're having reparations in favor of diversity. So we are in favor and intend to advocate for a different kind of affirmative action that is specific to a group of people that Lyndon Baines Johnson talked about when he gave that speech at Howard University. But that's a different discussion. But to the Reverend's point, we don't mean this as any kind of animus. And I intend to get the wealth. I agree with you, Reverend. I understand crumbs at the table, but trillions, I want it. It's so it's old. So I don't intend for this piecemeal stuff to happen to me. in terms of what that fight is for. You know they're gonna fight tooth and nail, but I don't ever view anything as being impossible in terms of our justice claim. But I understand exactly what you're saying. But to your larger point, there is no animus. It's just that we have specific justice claims. And when the Haitians ask the French, I understand absolutely why they don't include me. It makes perfect sense that I'm not included when they make their demand, just like it makes perfect sense that we don't include them when we make our specific demand against America.
And I didn't mean to imply there was any animus. I simply want us to have a collaborative effort. Let me just say, whatever the people in California is doing, that's fine. And anything your group can do to collaborate with them, it ought to be available. And the same thing for those, whether they're in the Congo or wherever. It ought to be a collaborative effort. All of us, you know, in this boat. We may be rowing up different streams, but we're all trying to get this thing done. So I would hope that your group would reach out to the people in California and that all folk of color will try to share information, share processes that we might be successful wherever we're trying from. Okay, Lyndon,
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you, Reverend Milner. And for those of you who have joined late, again, we are joined by Yvette Carnell and Simeon Harris with the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. So we had a question from the chat from Michelle Tingle. How will reparations work if the U.S. is already in trillions of debt?
The same way every single program that's happening while the U.S. is in trillions in debt is happening. The same way $2 trillion was invented out of thin air during COVID to be passed around to citizens. I don't think this is a question of budget because the government finds money for the programs it wants to prioritize. And if you look at even in the Democratic space, you have such a large amount of programs that people are willing to put money towards right away. This is an issue of will, not an issue of whether it can be done. It absolutely can be done.
All right, thank you. So next up we have Ms. Brenda Cox. Ms. Brenda, are you still on? Guess she dropped. Ms. B.
What I want to say, I don't think there's any animosity between anybody, and it shouldn't be. I know that they might have got to Jamaica and dropped some slaves off, and they were cutting sugar cane, and they sent and came on to America, and we picked cotton, but we all were slaves. What we can do is share how we won the battle with them, and them against their oppressors. All of us was oppressed, and that's the point. And we share what we've learned and what we've gotten from it and move forward. That's the main thing that we ought to do. Teach other, each one reach one and teach one. That's our goal in this world, should be to help all the least of these, and we are the least of these. So it's no need us thinking of anything else. And when the war broke out over there, Russia invaded, they didn't worry about the debt, did they? They sent all the money to Ukraine. We gonna talk about the debt.
Still sending it.
And they still sending it, weapons, money, everything. But when it comes to us, we want to rationalize how they gonna do it and why they gonna do it. They gonna do it because we demanded it be done.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Thank you, Ms. B. Brenda Cox, I think you joined back up. I guess Brenda dropped again. John Jones, you had your hand raised at one point.
I didn't drop.
Okay.
I just lost what I was going to say, and I agree with the Reverend and the lady that just spoke, that we should all work together. I find it interesting that history, the West Indies, the Caribbean, Cuba, all of those islands, the English, French, Belgium, Spanish, they were slaves because they were dropped off at those islands, either because they came from Africa, they were sick, or the boat was overloaded. But they were slaves just like the slaves that came to the United States. So we are American, African Americans, but they came from the same countries in Africa. So when you talk about getting money, for our slavery, we all should try to work together, because the only reason that they were in those other islands, a lot of them were dropped off because their ancestors were either sick or the boat was overloaded. But if not, we all would have been over here in America.
And let me just say one quick thing. Listen, I think this should all be a collaborative effort. I don't think oppressed, people who come from slavery should do anything other. I don't think we have the luxury not to collaborate. But I will say the reason that they are asking for a different amount of money than what we're asking for, than what some of the African countries are asking for, is because we all built something different, right? We all made a different contribution to whatever country we were in, right? And it just so happens that ADOS, in terms of our enslavement, slavery built America, which means that slavery built the richest country in the world, right? And so that's a specific claim. Now, I agree with Ms. B, and I've said this before. There's a reason why after 2018-19, we came out and mainstream this reparations advocacy. You see the whole world start talking about it again, right? Because everybody knows once this American domino falls, the dominoes fall around the world. I think we set that thing off. And I think that's what you're seeing. We were not seeing global reparations conversations. I've seen dozens of countries over the past 3 years, right? So I do think what we do, you can read, I've read papers about how our liberation struggle is a guiding light in this country. And that's what we continue as ADOS. So I don't think there's any animus. I don't think there's any animosity. I think there will be collaboration. And I think we all have specific justice claims.
All right.
I hope so.
John, I see you dropped your hand. Miss Benita. Oh, and you're still on mute.
Mute. Okay. I would like to say that I think that the Black church is missing and their advocacy is missing. ADOS is taking the lead, but the Black churches need to, the Black leadership of the churches and the different historical Black organizations need to sit down with ADOS and determine a path forward, because what I see is missing is you have the older generation, which I'm a part of, along with a younger generation who has more energy than people myself, my age and older have. But we are stuck in a position where we don't want to support and kind of what we would call pass the baton or support this particular movement at this time, because we are used to having things that way. And then a lot of the older people say, oh, wait until your time. And really what they're really saying is wait until we're dead and then you could take over. So, we have to have those real serious conversations about civil rights and the movement and how we go forward together, because I hear us talking about how we're going to collaborate, how we should collaborate, but we need to sit down in a strategy or think tank session and hash that out behind closed doors among ourselves, and then have a way forward where everybody gets what they need, if it's ego or whatever, but they get something that they need on the path forward. And I think that the Black churches need to step up to the plate. And I'm going to say it, you all know me to say exactly what I mean. On Martin Luther King's assassination day, there were only flowers there beyond his grave from ADOS. That is the only organization that I saw had flowers sitting in front of his crypt. So, I think that, everybody's going off on an ego, and they really are not following Dr. King's dream. And that's something that I see ADOS holding true to, saying we're gonna take this all the way to the finish line.
Thank you, Miss Bonita, and I agree with that. And we have reached out, and I agree that needs to happen. All of that needs to happen, and we have absolutely reached out to Progressive Baptists, and we intend to continue reaching out. And one thing, let me just say one other thing that occurred to me about collaboration. I think we're talking about international collaboration, and it's absolutely necessary, but we haven't even really spoken in this group, and I don't see a concern except for Ms. Bonita in terms of domestic collaboration, right? Before we talk about how we're going to collaborate internationally, we need to have a conversation about how different groups and organizations and people who do advocacy are going to collaborate internally. Because Ms. Bonita brought a great point in terms of the churches and all of our organizations, where are they in terms of this fight? So I think before we get, and I'm not saying we don't get to international collaboration, I think we do. I think before we get to that, though, we have to really talk about how are we going to internally collaborate, and as we march toward reparations and a transformative Black agenda.
All right. I know Minister Muhammad had a question, and then Faye Cofield.
Yes.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Muhammad.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the members of ADOS, have they ever read this book? I don't know if you can see it. It's called The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, and it's how Jews gain control of the Black American economy. I'm bringing it up because I believe America gives more than $800 million a year to the state of Israel, and they've been doing it, I believe, since the 50s. So to say that we should not be able to get any money, I think that's that's something you need to talk about, how we gonna get the money. If you can give that kind of money to the state of Israel for all those years, and now you're gonna tell us you got no money to give us for reparations, I think that question should be raised. Also, we should look at the Jewish members and bankers who were a part of the international slave trade. They financed the boats that brought slaves over. Not only did they finance the boats, they also financed the slave trade, meaning I could go into an auction, say I want to buy so many slaves for $500, but I only got $100, and Jewish bankers would finance the rest of the $400 for me to get some slaves. There should be some responsibility there with the Jewish bankers who not only financed the slave trade, but they also took the cotton that we had and they would take it up to New York for the needle trades. And that's how they made money off their clothing. And that's how Wall Street got started. That's how Lehman Brothers got started. That's how all of these bankers got started, off of the backs of Black people as slaves. So I think all of those ought to be brought into whatever discussion we have about reparations. And I don't know if you all ever have spoken with any of the members of the Nation of Islam's research team, but our research team, they put together the study of this book. They not only have quotes in here of what they did, but they got quotes in this book of Jewish bankers telling you what they did, why they did what they did during Jim Crow, as well as during slavery. So I think if to leave this portion out of the discussion is not a good thing. That we have to bring this portion of the discussion in, no matter how much they want to call us anti-Semites and all of that. Well, we understand why they do that. Anybody they disagree with, they're going to call an anti-Semite, but we need to be on their tails about what they did to us too as well. Thank you.
I think you, I'm sorry, Yvette, go ahead.
No, I didn't have a comment.
I have a comment.
Thank you,
This is
Mr. Muhammad. I'm sorry, 1 second. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's an example of the types of collaborations. You know, our focus is specifically the federal government. However, there definitely were private companies, individuals, and other groups that participated and made money and made their greatness in America came from the plunder of our group. And so our focus initially is the federal government because that's the biggest and baddest of them, right? That's the one that undergirds everything across. But I think that that's an example where, you know, if your organization is focusing on that, we support the focus of getting restitution from our people, for our people, from all of the different groups that that harmed us. So thank you for that ad.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mentioned that because the government is giving the state of Israel this money and has been giving it to them since the 50s. How much money?
That's how we know they can do it. That's
Exactly.
how we know they can make it right with us. Yep, that's how we know.
Exactly.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so question list, we have John Jones, Faye Cofield, Larry Riley, and then the final question will go to Dammers.
Yeah,
Oh, John, you're on mute now.
am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Wallman. My usual question, and we all know it, so I don't mean to offend anybody. A meeting without action is what? A waste of time. Time to convene. I know an old historic church that seats 2,000. We want to work together collaboratively. Let's get together face to face on Auburn Avenue.
Sounds good to me.
I'm coming from Gwinnett like you, Mr. Jones, so we'll have the same drive, and I'm always helping.
There we go. We need a convener. Well. Is that the Reverend? Who was the Reverend that just spoke up? I'm sorry, I couldn't see, but I heard a preacher's voice.
Oh,
we need
Reverend
a convener.
Motley.
We need a convener, spiritual convener.
All right, let's do it. I'm ready. Let's get together after the
yes, sir.
Zoom call, Mr.
All right, yes, Faye Cofield.
Well, first of all, I kind of had my hand up and I got lost, but I heard somebody say that, we're not allowing the young people to do anything. I think that that's completely untrue. We saw that in Tennessee the other day when the two youngest members of the Tennessee House stood up and shouted out. And we also saw when they went outside the room and they were put out, they were met by groups of young people. We keep forgetting that this all started with high school students from Tennessee, from Nashville schools, which, by the way, is where the sit-ins actually started at Fisk, with high school students who went to the Capitol. So to say that we aren't giving it to these kids and they are left out, they're not left out. The news media may not be showing them, but we've got some very active kids out there. And, I have no problem with them doing exactly what they did in Nashville. And I think it has served as a lesson to other young people that you can stand up and you can go out and you can protest and you can bring the government to its knees. Okay, that there's no question that it works. My concern about the thing with reparations is that we tend to forget that in this country, if you go to a casino, you are considered in Alabama, you are considered on native land. You leave the United States when you go to a casino. And if you look at the sign, it says you are leaving the US and you are on tribal land, which is a different country unto itself. We should be looking at all of these people that they've given reparations to. And that includes the Native population. They've given the Japanese reparations. We haven't gotten them because we're in this foolish fight about whether or not we want to include this one and that one. Reparations is something that we just need to say, look, y'all gonna get up off this money. You're gonna get up off of it quick. And we're gonna decide who we want, who should get the money. It shouldn't be that if your granddaddy was white or if you came here from Panama in the 1950s. Everybody that's Black is being discriminated against. I mean, when you walk in the building, like I looked at the young lady, if I saw her and looked at her, I would say she Black until she told me she was Panamanian. So, you know, we need to work out a better argument than we have. And we also, as I need to say, we have to look at allowing those of us who want to leave the opportunity to leave. By the way, I have a problem with Wall Street being left out of this. I have a problem with businesses that name themselves the Black Wall Street, because Wall Street was founded on the exploitation of human beings, be they Black, be they Native Americans, whatever. That is what they were founded on. Somebody was correct when they said that they not only participated in the selling of and financing of slaves, they also participated in the selling of the products of slaves. So they benefited from it all the way around. And I'm just going to end with this. I keep hearing a lot of talk. I guess because I'm getting old, I'm getting meaner and more just disappointed in what I'm seeing. I keep hearing a lot of talk about we need to do this, we need to do that. We couldn't even get together a boycott against Pepsi when they did Ludacris the way they did Ludacris. But here's what I posted on one of my Facebook pages. I posted about the Montgomery bus boycott. And we need to make sure that we tell the truth about the Montgomery bus boycott and the action in Birmingham in '63. And that is that we shut it down. We shut down Montgomery. We didn't worry about this argument about Black businesses would suffer. We shut down Montgomery. Black people walked for, what was it, Reverend Motley, 300 and almost 70 days at a time when we did not have cars. Most of us didn't have cars. We were dependent upon the bus, rain, a cold weather, whatever. Black folks walked because they realized the dignity could not be exchanged for the right to sit at the back of the bus and be told to get up out their seat and stand. So we need to, if we're gonna really get out there and bring this movement back, we need to start telling the truth and get off this Disney version of who Dr. King was, what Dr. King said, what happened with our protests. Because if you remember, when they bombed 16th Street Baptist Church, Dr. King said, he named a group of people, including Black people, Black ministers, who were all complacent in it because they did not stand up, they did not speak out about injustice. And I think, you know, knowing Dr. Lowry like we knew him, he would want us to stand up and to speak out about what is going on here, what is going on in this country and how they are slowly pushing us back beyond 1963, beyond 1954, and pushing us back beyond 1920. So if we're not going to stand up and talk about it and demand change, we need to be quiet. We need to be very quiet and say we're going to accept it. And those of you who get mail from me, I'm signing off my mail with this. I always say courage is standing up when everybody else is seated, but I've added this part. You get what you deserve what you get when you are unwilling to fight for what you deserve. And I am totally upset at the Black leadership in this country when they were silent and trying to figure out a plan on what to do to help those 2 young men down in Tennessee.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that, Ms. Kofi. And let me just say one thing, because I think this is a great clarifying moment, right? And I want to just bring this to head in a certain way. You know, this is 2023. This is not 1953. This is not 1963. And what I mean by that is that this is a continuation of Dr. King's movement. This is not a replication of Dr. King's movement, meaning that we have to have different tools for what we're trying to do. Now, the courts in America have been very specific about their hostility towards race as a metric, and they have just opened the door for lineage. And so we're moving towards the door that has been opened by the courts. They're saying basically that we're not doing anything just based on melanin. If you have a case for redress, we are willing to hear it. If this country has done you wrong for a long period of time, we are willing to hear it. So one of the things that I have to do as a steward of this movement, I have to do my due diligence and say, we have to be in line, not just with the cost, we have to be in line with what the courts are telling me. So I understand your thoughts in terms of, hey, we were all Black, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that's happening though is that's not what the courts are saying. We all saw what happened with the Black farmers as well when they tried to include, first it was Black, then it was all disadvantaged people, then it was minorities. And you have to understand that at some point you're going to have some white buy-in. And white people are going to be very hostile to saying that we're going to give stuff to just people because they're Black, as opposed to the people who were reneged on in terms of their 40 acres and a mule. So we have to be able to make this case to them as well. We have to make it as strong a case as possible. So that is part of my responsibility as we go forward. Again, I don't see any problem with that because every other reparations group around the world has a very specific group of people that they're advocating for, right? CARICOM is not advocating for me. I'm not advocating for them. We can come together and collaborate, and we should do that as oppressed people in the world. But in terms of how we do reparations in this country, I have a responsibility not to squander this moment. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page about why this is happening the way it's happening.
Well, what would you say? I'm just gonna roll this out. We have some Black folks in this country that have prospered very well beginning back to the 1940s, and they have done exceptionally well. They have, you can say they've assimilated into the dominant culture. They have lots of money. They have not been discriminated against, and you can't prove that they've been discriminated against because they, as we say, they have done quite well. But would we exclude them? My thing is, if you Black in this country, if you are Black in this country, you have faced some type of discrimination. And it's not, I'm not trying to pit one group against the other or say one group has more power than the other. I am just saying that in this country, you have one census question. It doesn't say, are you Black Panamanian? It doesn't say, are you Black and Cuban or whatever. It asks you one question: are you African American? Which is not even a legitimate way to classify us as a people. But as long as we have to be classified as one, we should be receiving the benefits as one because we are all visibly Black. And that is where the discrimination comes in based upon the color of our skin. Give you a quick example. George Stanford Brown, one of the biggest actors of the 60s and 70s. Everybody thought he was Black. He wasn't Black, he was Cuban, but he looked Black and he was discriminated against because he looked Black. He was not a white Cuban. So, that's just my rampage for the day. But I think we ought to include everybody because discrimination is
we
based
gotta
on
stop.
color.
We got some other people. Reverend people have her hand up.
Yep,
Larry has his hand up.
I got her on the list, but I think to your point, Faye, this isn't this isn't ADOS's position
Right.
because they don't agree with these groups. It's ADOS's position because that's what the courts are ruling. So if
And
they
let me just
can't be included in that, I think
and
that's
let me
why
just
ADOS
and let
isn't
me just make
focusing on.
thank you, Lyndon. And let me just say one quick thing. In terms of rich or wealthy Black people, the data says that those people are aberrations, right? That they really don't exist in any large numbers anywhere. Like we are a wealthless group. So those people are aberrations. And the data that we presented in terms of the wealth gap demonstrates that those people don't exist in any large or really quantifiable numbers, right? So I just wanted to make sure that we understand that the thing when you talk about people presenting as Black, that is a presentation of melanin. An Indian American can have a presentation of melanin, like the Indian American who got into school and said he was Black and have no inherited the wealthlessness that comes from slavery. And I would say that Indian shouldn't get reparations either. We're not having a melanin conversation. We're having a conversation of the cost of coming from American slavery. There's a cost of coming from Jamaican slavery. There's a cost of Haitian slavery. There's a cost for all those things, and that cost is different. And so that's the conversation that we're having. We're not having a conversation that's built on discrimination, because we need anti-discrimination law to ensure that our Black immigrant brothers and sisters do not get discriminated against because they look like ADOS, basically, right? This phenotype. But that is not the conversation we're having in terms of our wealthlessness.
All right, Larry, and please be brief with your questions.
Yeah, I just got a quick comment. I just want to say that if you think about it, the American descendants of slavery, we do not have one organization in this country that represents our specific needs. We've been here 400 years, been through slavery, Jim Crow, you name it, we've been through it all. And I think it's egregious and quite, I say racist, that we don't have one organization besides this new recent organization, ADOS Advocacy Foundation, that doesn't represent our specific needs, because we have a specific and we have a unique history in this country. ADOS Advocacy Foundation is the only organization that's doing that. So I just hope people's agenda, the individuals on this call, I just hope that we are, a lot of us can support the organization. This organization is for us, the one and only. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Larry, on that note, real quick, Larry, we are getting prepared to open up for membership across the country. JoinADOS.com will put you on our list where you can get communications as we go through that process. Again, that's JoinADOS.com, JoinADOS.com. And we also have a whole list of policy positions with our comprehensive Black agenda that covers everything from business to agriculture, which is something big here in Georgia, especially when you leave Atlanta, cannabis, healthcare, housing. It is a multitude of agenda items that are for all Black folks in this country. And so we encourage you to plug in with us, joinados.com, so you can get the latest notifications. And we'll be opening up chapters across the country. We already have an active chapter here in Atlanta and several other places, and we're going to be opening up more. So we look forward to you all's involvement in bringing these ideas to the table so we can make the change that we need to make. So thank you all.
All right, so final three comments, Ms. Damaris, followed by Ms. Janetta, and then Minister Regal, and then we'll move over into announcements. Ms. Damaris.
Okay, so real quick, again, Yvette, the presentation was great, and such a presentation evokes question, and I see what we asked, or a lot of the comments were for the sake of clarity. I didn't see it as us fighting about the issue or the money. So everything always boils down to interpretation. But to the comment about the questions on questionnaires or student loan applications, whatever, I put what works for me. Sometimes I'm Black, Sometimes I'm African American, sometimes I'm Hispanic because Spanish is my first language. So foreign people from other countries don't always put Black, there's that other column. So when there's a conversation and a debate and a discussion amongst white, again, it's seen as, oh, that was a passionate conversation. When Black people ask questions or ask for clarity or education on a topic, is seen as dissension. And I didn't see it that way. So thanks again for your presentation, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
No,
I learned a lot.
thank you. And I don't view it as that either. Like, I mean, it's a spirited conversation. I mean, so I don't view it as that either. I'm gonna have we're gonna have a meeting at Miss Faye house. I mean, but I listen. This is a spirited conversation. People have points of view, right? People have questions, and I think that's part of the reason that this went as long as it's gone, is because when you say things, it triggers questions in the mind. I just want you to understand that I don't view any of it as negative or anything like that. I view it as just us trying to hash this out in private amongst ourselves, what this looked like, what this means, and it's necessary, right? So it's not a problem at all.
All right. And
Ms. Janetta?
I just want to say thank you as well. This was very good information, good dialogue. And I was so happy to hear some of the comments here. It may sound like we were arguing, but that's just how we are. I'm like Bernie Mac, we Black, we loud. That's just how we talk here. But I want to speak directly to the young lady, I think, that mentioned about the young people and how maybe the older ones are not giving them their due. And one thing that I can say is we perish for lack of knowledge. We're talking about what's going on and how we're going back. And I hear so many people talk about what they're taking out of schools. I'm the education chairperson. What they're taking out of school, what they're putting in the books. But what I want to admonish the younger generation that are coming up, that are going to be the advocates, that are going to be making even better changes, to check in our education. Let's not talk about so much what they're taking out, but let's focus on what they're putting in. This is the latest United States government history book that is in all of the classrooms, because Texas is the state that makes sure that our books get published and they're guaranteed to go all over the country. This book states that the Underground Railroad was an actual railroad that were ran by Caucasians, and a Black woman by the name of Harriet Tubman assisted them, and she helped to free 300 enslaved people. That's what our children are being taught in the classroom, in the history books today. So let's not focus on what they're taking out. We need to get in there as people, as advocates, to find out what they're putting in our children's mind. And I talk to these children all the time. They think that's the gospel. They think the Underground Railroad was an actual railroad that was going underground and led by white people, and a Black lady named Harriet Tubman helped them. Young people, let's get out there and let's do something, because we're talking about our future. And as our new young leaders, this is something that I feel like we need to start tackling. Not what they're taking out, what are they putting in our children's mind? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Janetta. Minister Regal? And you're on mute.
They mentioned that the indigenous people have been doing better than the Blacks. And I have news for you. I have been working with indigenous people for longer than I've been in Atlanta and working with Black people. But let me tell you, I am in support of both. Number one, the indigenous people were in this land before you came and before the whites came. Their land was taken and their religion has been taken as well. The most recent was last week when Oak Flat in Arizona has gone to the courts in California, 9 judges were to decide whether the Apache's most recent treaty is being blown away by a company who wants to harvest one of the largest copper deposits in the world. It happens to be in Arizona. It happens to be the sacred spot, the enormous area where the Apaches go to bury their dead, to do the ceremonies for their women to become women when they have their first menarche. It's where they go to pray for all kinds of things. Their treaty is being violated again, and their religion is being taken away. This company from Australia who wants the copper is going to blow up that whole area so that there's nothing left. There will be no place to go. It will be desecrated land. They have had very few treaties that have been honored. They have also been enslaved by the whites. It's not a question of just Black people. And if you don't believe me, talk to our friend Joe Beasley. He studied the issues as well. And I honor both of you, both Black and Indigenous. And I want you to understand, Janetta, you were talking about what was going on in terms of textbooks. You don't even see Native Americans talked about in textbooks. That's because we're trying very hard to eliminate them from anybody's knowledge about the fact that we came in and took away everything.
That's right.
Not just their bodies and their work.
Next.
So,
Well, and
I
thank you.
want I want to bring up the fact that they have a God as well.
Yes.
Great Spirit is what they call their God. And it's not being honored by anybody at this point. And I agree that you've got a lot of things to be upset about, but so do the Native Americans. And I want you to look at what has been done to them as well as you go about wanting reparations. How about honoring treaties from people who had been here forever?
So right.
And I respect that.
In us as well. Okay. So you're so right. Thank you.
Simeon.
Oh, well, I so appreciate your position. I know my family is here from Georgia, right in Buena Vista, Georgia, and out of Crawford County, out in Roberta, Georgia. And the things that we experience while the Native Americans, this isn't a contest of who. I think that they have to advocate and bring forward the organizations that fight that fight. And I know my grandfather, when he lost his land in Buena Vista, Georgia, in relation to Pickford versus Glickman, the big lawsuit that happened with the USDA, I know that there were no other groups standing up for him in that moment. I also know that when I talk to him and I talk and get accounts from my great-great-grandmother, I hear and understand how even in Georgia, your 5 tribes own slaves and their effects of that slavery owning within the 5 tribes. And so I don't believe that our activism negates another group, but Black Americans, specifically Americans who descend from slavery in the United States, ADOS, we have a very specific history. When you can't point to a group within American society that hasn't stepped on us in some form or fashion. And we saw that with our Native American tribes who wouldn't get rid of their slaves after the war. It took a whole separate treaty, the Indian Treaties of 1866, where we saw they were willing and it was in exchange. Now, that doesn't mean all of them, But what that does mean is that our people were harmed a very specific way. And I know that we support justice in all forms, but our focus has to be the justice for our group. When I look at this fight, I see my grandmother, Essie Slaughter, my grandfather, Melton Slaughter, my great-grandmother, Elsie Slaughter out of Columbus, Georgia. I see those people. I see the sharecroppers in my family. I see the enslaved person. I see my half-white great-great-grandfather, Tim Slaughter, who was the baby of a slave. And that he didn't get any of the autonomy that his half-whiteness would have allowed, because it wasn't just his skin color that was the problem, it was his lineage that was the problem. And I think we have to fight that fight, and I hope that the Native American community can be unified with us as we fight that fight.